Hello, DE Psych. Wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about plasticity of the brain today. So we have about 3 slides that we're going to look at, and I'm going to talk to you about the brain and what we call plasticity. So neuroplasticity or brain plasticity is the ability of the brain to basically repair itself. Now, what we need to understand is that the brain is never going to repair itself after it's been traumatized exactly the way it was again. See, unlike our skin cells, our brain neurons do not regrow. So when we hurt something within our brain, those cells are done. They're dead. So therefore, when those cells die, what our brain has to do is figure out a new pathway, a new roadway to get from point A to point B in order to have us do something as simple as move our finger. So, for instance, if a portion of my brain, my motor cortex, has been traumatized and I am unable to move my finger any longer, then I can go through therapy to try and get that to move that finger again, but it's now going to have to take a new pathway in order to figure out how to do that again because the old pathway is closed down. Those neurons are dead. So kind of consider it like if I-70 from Gypsum to Eagle was the way in which the pathway in our brain that moved this finger all of a sudden becomes you're incapable of using that anymore. We now have to figure out a new pathway. Our brain has to find its highway 6 in order to get from Eagle to Gypsum. So this is the brain's ability to kind of repair itself, but not in the terms of we think of just to once again heal the exact path, but instead to find a different pathway. Without this ability, the brain would be unable to develop. And so this is how we recover from any kind of brain trauma. This is also how a healthy brain finds ways to do new skills, whether that's skills of intelligence or skills of motor ability, like moving our hands. The older we are, the less plasticity we have in our brain. So we talk about how the brain kind of reaches its peak at about the age of 25 to 30. After that, the brain starts to age and we lose plasticity. This is why it's a lot easier for somebody to recover from brain trauma that's young versus somebody that's older. And older people will have more incidences of things like stroke that they may never ever really overcome. Whereas a young person, if they were to have a stroke, can overcome those things and maybe once again almost work and function as normal. So we look at a couple of examples here. Possible causes of brain damage that can cause issues with the brain kind of rejuvenating itself or refixing itself would be tumors, infections, exposure to toxic substances, degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, closed head injuries, concussions, and strokes. And you can see here, these are some examples of the brain. Slide A there is a person who died immediately after a stroke, noting the swelling in the right-hand side here. That's not normal. The brain of a person who survived a long time after a stroke, but notice the cavities. Many cells were lost in these cavities here. They should not be that big. And then the brain of a person who suffered a gunshot wound and died immediately. Obviously, that's hitting into that limbic system in that brain stem that goes up into the brain, and that's going to cause immediate death. Brain plasticity. So this is an example here. If this portion of the brain is damaged, shown in red, as a result of something that happened, trauma, like we said, disease, over time, another portion of the brain will take over the loss of that function. It could be on a completely different hemisphere, Or maybe it's somewhere else, maybe in this upper portion of the frontal lobe or the side portion of the temporal lobe that isn't necessarily um, being used for any specified function. All parts of our brain are being used. It's a matter of how those neural connections, where they connect and how they connect. So again, the idea of if I-70 were closed to get from Eagle to Gypsum, we could find a Highway 6, or maybe we find a back route through the biking paths that we have that go by the Seven Hermits. So we find different ways to do those skills, but that ability to create those new roads or neural pathways is going to be very dependent on, one, the age of the person in order for the plasticity to have true effect, and also the practice that's done with that. The more therapy that a person has, the more practice that a person has with trying to make those neurons reconnect and find a pathway, the better off. It's not just going to happen naturally. That's how, if somebody has had brain trauma and they've lost their function to maybe use the right side of their body, stroke victims, that happens, that they're going to have to go through physical therapy. They're going to have to go through occupational therapy or speech therapy in order to practice and try and get those neural connections to find the new road. So with that said, hopefully that makes some sense. And of course, as always, if you have questions, please ask them. There's an opportunity to ask these questions in our discussion for this lesson. And I hope that this helps you to learn a little bit more about the brain and its ability to not exactly heal itself, but to still function even after major trauma. Thanks a lot, guys, and I hope to see you again real soon.